Welcome to Securing a Fairer Future, New South Wales Labor's first ever online convention. I'm Mark Lennon, Party President, and I would like to start by acknowledging that we gather today on the lands of the First Peoples of this nation, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Normally, over 800 party members would be gathering in the Town Hall for our annual conference, but of course this is no normal year. So, along with many other events, our conference had to be postponed. But that hasn't stopped us from doing the Labor thing, gathering to discuss ideas and policies that promote Labor's values. So we're online, with over 900 members joining in across the state to discuss our vision for the future. And when we discuss the future, let's remember, we wouldn't be able to hold today's event online unless a decade ago, a Labor government had the vision to establish the NBN. That type of decision is what securing a fairer future is all about. I want to thank those who have made today a reality, but in particular, thanks to you, wherever you are, for being part of today's event. I'm sure for all of us, it will be a most enlightening day. And now I'm pleased to welcome our host for the day, Meryl Swanson. Meryl.
Thanks, Mark. Welcome to everyone joining us for New South Wales Labor's first ever online convention. I'm Meryl Swanson, Federal Member for Paterson up in the Hunter, and I'm the Shadow Assistant Minister for Defence. But for today, I'm going to be your host. Before we start the proceedings, I'd like to welcome the Member for Barton, Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians and Families, and Shadow Minister for Social Services, Linda Burney, to perform an acknowledgement of country.
Good morning and welcome to this extraordinary convention in extraordinary times. I know that you are all sitting in the lands of many different nations. We are on Gadigal country today, and I've been invited to do the acknowledgement of country. My name is Linda Burney. I'm the Shadow Minister for Families and Social Services. I'm the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians. I'm the Member for Barton, and importantly, I am from the mighty Wiradjuri Nation. This convention is being held on the land of the Gadigal people, and the Gadigal hold a very important part in Australia's history, the Australian story. They were the first nation to see those tall ships sail in, Philip's first fleet. They experienced the brunt of colonisation firsthand. They suffered terribly from introduced diseases like smallpox. And the Gadigal are the people that we remind ourselves of today. Acknowledgement of country is many things. It's respectful, it's generous, and it's something that we can all be part of, and it's something that we can all do. Most of all, it's good manners and an ancient, ancient custom. So I acknowledge the Gadigal. I remind us all of the extraordinary contribution those First Peoples have made to this nation, and we are all custodians of the amazing gift that First Peoples bring, and that is the longest continuous surviving culture on this blue planet. Have a wonderful convention.
Thanks, Linda. Welcome everyone to the New South Wales Labor Trades Hall, the home of the Labor movement and the Labor Party here in New South Wales. The room we're in today was the original meeting hall for the union movement here in Sydney. It has served the working people of our state since 1895. It's the place that the forefathers of our movement used to organise and agitate for progress. It was also the meeting space for dozens of social, cultural and charitable groups who helped to form the rich tapestry of Australia's cultural identity. It was in this building that 2KY, the first radio station to be owned by working people, started broadcasting on Saturday the 31st of October, 1925. And though times have changed, we thought it fitting to come back and try a very different type of broadcast today. We are in unprecedented times. The turmoil of the last 12 months has been astounding. Drought, bushfires, and then a pandemic. New South Wales and the country has been left crippled. But now is the time where leadership can prevail. We have opponents who believe that government can outsource the recovery to the private enterprise, that government has no business assisting with childcare, housing, or giving support to healthcare, hospitality and tourism workers. The Morrison recession is the deepest and darkest in almost a century, and the decisions this government is taking will just make it worse for hard-working Australians. We require people with empathy and vision tugging on the levers of power. And that's what you'll hear from all of our guests today. Now, a few bits of housekeeping before we begin. Firstly, welcome to the 900 people watching us from their living rooms and home offices throughout New South Wales. Today is all about you, and we would love to hear your feedback in the chat window on Zoom or in the comments on Facebook. Additionally, to keep our speakers here at Sydney Trades Hall energised, we've made sure that they can hear you. That means if you'd normally clap at something they say, or it's the introduction or an end of a speech, we'd encourage you to clap along too. Let them know. Today will be split in two sessions. The morning session will feature keynote speeches from some of the leaders of our party and our movement, including State Labor leader Jodie McKay and Federal Labor leader Anthony Albanese. The second session is split into two parts, each featuring 3 panels. These panels will discuss issues critical to Australia's future. If at any time you get lost and you wish to come back and watch today's proceedings, please visit newsouthwaleslabour.org.au/convention. Again, I just want to say a huge thank you to the hundreds of people who've logged in to watch us on Zoom, Facebook and YouTube. Joining us in just a moment, New South Wales Labor General Secretary Bob Namva. But first, a short clip about New South Wales Labor leader Jodie McKay.
I grew up in Gloucester in country New South Wales. My mum ran a small business and my dad worked in the dairy industry. They worked hard and they looked after each other and their neighbours. Like most parents, they wanted me to have something better than what they had. I've brought that experience and these values to everything I do in public life. I'm Jodie McKay. I'm a country girl and a fighter for the people of New South Wales. Right now, New South Wales is doing it tough. The Liberal government has been in power for 10 years and they've left too many people behind. They've privatised assets, they've gutted TAFE, and they've sent jobs overseas. We've seen chaos and division. Ministers focused on their own jobs and not those that matter. The Premier does not have a vision for this state, but I do, a true Labor vision for New South Wales. I've seen how communities thrive when they're given the opportunity. Wherever you come from, whatever your story, you should have the opportunity to thrive, whether you live in Western Sydney or far west New South Wales. Our policies will support everyone. New South Wales should be a state where no one is left behind. A thriving economy that creates jobs in the city and the bush, and of course jobs for the future. And a government that puts people at the heart of all decisions. More than ever, people in New South Wales need someone who will stand up for them, who will fight for them. I will stand with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, New South Wales Labor General Secretary Bob Namva.
Thanks, Meryl. There's a profound humility in joining you this morning from the banner room of the Sydney Trades and Labor Council building. Hallowed ground for our movement. Almost 130 years ago to the day, this Trades and Labor Council was not just the centre of trade unionism in Australia. It was ground zero in a political project our country had never before contemplated. To build a political party from the ground up to absorb the monopolies which society at large has helped create, and to ensure by the opportunity of fairly remunerated labour, a share in those things that make life worth living. On that day, in those rooms, a steely resolve was formed to develop a platform, object and rules of what would become the Australian Labor Party, where the values of equality, fairness, democracy and justice would find a permanent home. From those early beginnings, and for 130 years, our party has made and unmade social conditions informed by those values. From the end of oppressive working conditions and all forms of discrimination, to the protection of our fragile ecosystem, to the lasting reforms of superannuation, Medicare and the NDIS. Our party's founders, driven as they were by decency, dignity and tenacity, could not have contemplated what an irrepressible force for progress the ALP would become. An irrepressible force that hasn't just survived on memories, but endures because of the continuing relevance of its values. Never more so than in the unprecedented economic and social circumstances of 2020, where too many Australians are being left behind by premiers and prime ministers who don't believe in the power of government as a driver of change. I want to thank you, all our rank and file members and affiliated unions, for all you do to throw your heads and hearts into the task of protecting the important legacy that has been left for us. That sense of service, purpose and discipline has never been more important for our party. Your passion, conviction and resolve, policy by policy, door knock by door knock, phone call by phone call, turns Labor oppositions into Labor governments. Being the inheritors of an important political tradition is a heavy burden to carry, but it's also an inspiration. We don't just have the responsibility to defend the legacy, but to develop our own. And today, in Jodie McKay and Anthony Albanese, we have our own leaders that are leaving their mark. Leaders with character, loyalty and values, whose lived experiences mean they understand the everyday challenges of families, workplaces and communities. Jodie's resolve on compassion, inclusiveness and integrity, Anthony's conviction on social housing and giving families a hand up. These aren't born out of a cynical electoral exercise, but from the scar tissue of their lives. Jodie, in particular, knows something that her opponents don't. It's a universal truth beyond their comprehension. Public service isn't about what selfish people can get out of it, but about what decent and honest people put into it. It gives me great pride to introduce the next Premier of New South Wales, Jodie McKay.
I want to start by honouring the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which I stand, and their elders past and present. Wherever you're joining us in New South Wales, you're on Aboriginal land. Can I acknowledge our federal leader, Anthony Albanese, and my deputy, Yasmin Catley, our affiliate unions, our entire New South Wales Labor team, And of course, you, our incredible New South Wales Labor members and supporters. I'm so pleased to address you today, and I come to you from the historic Sydney Trades Hall. As many of you know, it was built in 1895 as a place for workers to gather in pursuit of better pay and conditions. A timely reminder the values of New South Wales Labor stand strong in good times and bad, and that we always inspire society towards a better and fairer future. This year, our state has been confronted like never before. A devastating drought, shocking floods, catastrophic bushfires, a global pandemic, and now a terrible tumble into recession, the worst since the Great Depression. These times, however, have brought out the generosity of Australians. We've cared for each other. We're checking in on grandparents, parents, neighbours and friends. Yet today, our state has over 300,000 people out of work. We have families who can't afford to put food on the table, business owners at their wits' end, so many young people struggling. Right across Australia, we've had families separated, elderly people feeling lonely, and so many more experiencing real challenges to their mental health. During this difficult time, I say to the people of New South Wales, we hear you, we see you, and we stand with you. Every day, my Labor team and I have considered it our duty to fight for you, and we've fought for people wherever we can. Whether I was standing in the car park at the Crossroads Hotel, calling for more testing clinics, more PPE at our hospitals, or support for businesses in the Tweed, New South Wales Labor has advocated in the public interest. And when we saw something that wasn't fair or people left behind, I'm proud we stood up for our party's best values. On a visit to Balmoral in January, I met RFS Captain Brendan O'Connor. He told me how his community had been abandoned, and we could never let our firefighters be so under-resourced again. When lives were lost due to the Ruby Princess, it was Labor that stood up for the victims and crew, and it was Labor that pushed for a special commission of inquiry. And I'll never forget the day I stood with Anthony Bowe at Newmarch House on behalf of his mum Patricia and all the elderly residents needing care. So, of course, with all online events, sometimes you have technical issues, but thank you so much for staying with us. And of course, I can't guarantee this is going to be the last, but let's see how we go. And this is why, of course, we need our conference next year so that all of you can be there. And if something goes wrong, you can actually see what it is. So let me pick up from where I left. Today, our success in managing COVID-19 is due entirely to the hard work of our citizens. So to all who work across our health sector, our teachers and police and security guards, our bus, train and truck drivers, our aged care workers, our retail staff, and everyone who protected the public at risk to their own health, I say thank you. You've helped us through this pandemic, and you've done it with the strong support of your unions every day. Now, friends, a week is a long time in politics, and this week we've learned a lot about this Liberal and National government. But let me remind you what we already knew. We knew about this government's bungled projects and budget blowouts. We knew the state budget was in trouble and was propped up by easy money from privatisation. We knew they'd failed to build or upgrade more than 100 schools they promised. We knew homelessness has increased and that outcomes for the vulnerable, for children in care, carers and Aboriginal people have become so much worse. We knew about their lack of ministerial accountability and responsibility. We knew Sydney has become the most tolled city in the world. We knew of the rorts to community grants, with 95% of a $250 million fund funnelled into coalition seats. And we knew the disrespect this government has for workers. They've cut the wages of the 400,000 workers we've relied on during this pandemic. People like Tina Gok-Young, a cleaner at Westmead Hospital for the past 14 years. She's been keeping us safe, working as hard as ever during COVID. Now the government has thanked her by cutting her pay. And there is no greater disrespect than how they've treated injured workers under Dominic Perrottet. The workers' compensation scheme that should be protecting sick and injured workers has been stealing wages from them. The government call this agency iCare, but we know they don't care. Friends, after almost a decade in power, there is no denying what's going on. This is a tired government, a government without a plan. We have a Premier who likes the TV vision of wearing a hard hat and high-vis vest, but has no vision for New South Wales. Worst of all, though, after a decade in power, this government is rotting from the top down. This week we've had the extraordinary sight of the Premier before the Independent Commission Against Corruption. We've heard she knew exactly what Daryl Maguire was doing. She knew and she did nothing. She's turned a blind eye to misconduct for 6.5 years. Friends, we all know donations from property developers are banned, yet this Premier thinks it's okay for members of Parliament to accept commissions from the very same developers. On Thursday night, we forced changes in the upper house that ban ministers and parliamentary secretaries from taking commissions from property developers. Today, I'm announcing that when the Legislative Assembly returns next week, I want the first priority to be passing these amendments and bringing this ban into law. Friends, you've all heard me acknowledge the Premier has worked hard during this pandemic. But what we've seen this week isn't about whether Gladys Berejiklian works hard. It's actually about something far more important. It's about trust and integrity in public office. It's about the standards we set for our government and for ourselves. Being a member of Parliament is a great privilege, but it also comes with great responsibility. A promise to always serve your community, to always act honestly. But Gladys Berejiklian has not kept her promise, and it's why she can no longer be Premier of New South Wales. To walk past this would be to accept an impossibly low standard in government, and in the honesty and openness of public office, we cannot and will not accept this. You all know my story. I called out corruption in 2011, and it cost me personally and professionally. When you elected me as leader, I promised I would take the tough decisions to rebuild trust in our party. We needed to change, and we are changing. But our reform journey is not over yet. We have more work to do, and there will be difficult decisions to make. You've kept the faith during the most difficult of times, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. We are all in this together, and only together can we make sure that the very best of our party, our vision, our values, and our people shines brightly for all to see. Friends, you also know I'm a very different Labor leader. I'm the first New South Wales Labor leader since the 1960s to grow up in a country town, and I have never forgotten where I came from. When I was 18, I had to leave Gloucester to find a job. I worked my way up as a journalist and was so very privileged to represent the people of Newcastle. Now I represent Strathfield, one of the most multicultural communities in New South Wales. I understand the city, I understand the regions, and I understand the bush, and I will be a Premier for all of New South Wales. But to win in 2023, we need more than a critique on the problems of the day. People elect Liberal national governments to keep the status quo. They elect Labor to paint on a new canvas, to navigate the changes that are coming, and to imagine a better tomorrow. So for our party, our mission will always start and finish with jobs. More secure jobs, better paying jobs, jobs for the future, jobs in our primary industries and resources, our caring economy, and jobs for entrepreneurs and innovators. Jobs of the future like digital technology, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, the environment, and so much more. This government has no plan for jobs beyond construction and the Sydney CBD. We need more than that to get women, young people, and our regions back to work. We are the party of jobs, and we will never forget it. Friends, I'm really pleased to tell you that next week, my Deputy Leader, Yasmin Catley, will introduce the New South Wales Jobs First Bill to Parliament. Now, this bill is a key part of our New South Wales made policy. It will make clear that taxpayer funds should create jobs in New South Wales, support industry in New South Wales, and benefit communities in New South Wales. It will create the New South Wales Jobs First Advocate, make sure major projects deliver skills and opportunities for apprentices and trainees. And it will also include local content requirements supporting New South Wales jobs and industries. The Premier might have waved the white flag when she said recently that, and I quote, "New South Wales isn't good at building trains." But I say this: we are good at building things, Premier, and under a Labor government, we will build things again. Of course, creating jobs also means creating the right foundations. Today, we see too many of our young people entering the worst labour market in a generation without the help of a world-class school, TAFE and university system. Under the Berejiklian government, we've seen the worst results in maths, science and literacy in decades. Our Asia-Pacific neighbours have lapped us and we've fallen behind the likes of Estonia and Poland. We used to lead and now we lag. Of all the failings of this government, the most unforgivable is spending 10 years robbing an entire generation of the skills they need for the future. Under Bob Carr, New South Wales educational standards were among the world's best. When Labor is in government, they will be again. Friends, New South Wales Labor is the only party focused on the future of healthcare. It was Morris Yema who established many of the pandemic protocols to prepare for SARS that have guided the New South Wales response to COVID-19. And of course, it's Labor that built Medicare and the NDIS. You all know that. So only our Labor team can be trusted to reverse this government's cuts and to ensure we have both world-class facilities and world-class health workers caring for our community. After a decade of the New South Wales Liberals and Nationals, it's time to get government in New South Wales working again, so we can get the people of New South Wales working again. The best Labor governments always take society forward in a way that brings people along. But Hawke, Keating, McKell and Rann and the likes of Whitlam and Carr didn't do it by themselves. They stood on the shoulders of an entire Labor movement. So between now and 2023, I ask for all your energy, your passion, all your ideas. We know it's when times are tough that people turn to Labor for hope and renewal and a vision for tomorrow. Only Labor can deliver a fairer future because only Labor has delivered the fairer past. We can only do it if we do it together. So together, let's build a Labor government where every person matters. Together, let's build a Labor government that lifts us all up. Together, let's build a Labor government that leaves no one behind. Together, let's fight harder than ever before to build a Labor government and a fairer future for everyone.
If the past has shown us anything, it's why we need a Labor leader like Jodie McKay. The people of New South Wales need powerful representation. They need a strong voice. They need Jodie and her Labor team. Next up, we're going to hear from Mark Morey. Mark is the leader of Unions New South Wales. The members of our affiliated trade unions have been central to the success of New South Wales in combating the pandemic. Frontline workers across the state put their own health at risk to make sure New South Wales kept moving. They are the reason that we're doing as well as we are in this state, but they will also be central to the economic and health recovery. Despite this, we see a federal government led by Scott Morrison continue to attack workers. That's why the work of Mark Morey and our affiliated trade unions has never been so important. Everyone, please come together in welcoming Secretary of Unions New South Wales, Mark Morey.
Thanks for the chance to speak today. I pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Thank you to our party president, Mark Lennon, our dedicated party officers, and to you, our loyal and passionate party members, and my union brothers and sisters. This year has upended so many assumptions about politics, the economy, and our society. The health toll alone has been steep. COVID has claimed more than 900 lives. It would have claimed many, many more, but for the profound excellence of the public health and hospital system, a unionised public health and hospital system underpinned by Medicare and built by Labor governments, both here in New South Wales and nationally. While we have avoided the devastation of the Northern Hemisphere, COVID has still ravaged our economy this year. Vast numbers of Australians have had their livelihoods crushed and their careers derailed. Every Australian job matters. Every household without a breadwinner is one thrust into anxiety and hardship. And as is always the case, the hardship is not evenly spread. Some pockets of the community are feeling the downturn more than others. In southwest Sydney, 1 in 5 young people are without a job. That's triple the youth unemployment rate of the eastern suburbs. It's not much better across the rest of Western Sydney or indeed regional New South Wales. For Coffs Harbour and the mid-north coast, youth unemployment is above 15%. This is very disappointing. But what's even more disappointing is a state government that's thrown in the towel. In an era of surging unemployment, you'd think all stops would be pulled out to create jobs. And the government's own purchasing power would be the obvious starting point. But it seems the Premier is more interested in telling us what we can do and what we can't do. When asked recently about building trains in Australia to generate jobs, she glibly replied, "Australia and New South Wales are not good at building trains. That's why we have to purchase them." Well, I want to know why. Queensland and Victoria can build trains. Is there something in the water in New South Wales that we don't know about? Or is it possible that the New South Wales government is the problem? After all, the Sydney Convention Centre was built with steel shipped from China, where it could have come from the Illawarra or Western Sydney. The trams running to the eastern suburbs were built in Spain, running on tracks made in France. And we got badly ripped off with the project blowing out by billions and running months late. The B-line buses servicing the northern beaches were constructed in Malaysia, while our Waratah trains were built in South Korea. And of course, the new ferries making their way down the Parramatta River were built in Indonesia. These are the same ferries that can't quite fit under a bridge without possibly beheading a commuter. We have a New South Wales Transport Minister who thinks in the 21st century having deckhands scream duck as ferries approach bridges along the Parramatta River is an appropriate safeguard for commuter safety. The government can't defend its policy of exporting jobs. It's time that policy was abandoned. Government purchasing isn't the only lever available to growing jobs. In a crisis, the public sector is also a huge opportunity, and it's being squandered by this government. Just as the federal government was opening the floodgates to unleash stimulus over the past few months, there was Dominic Perrottet, the New South Wales Treasurer, trying to stop the flow. Cutting public sector wages, as the government has done, will take $3 billion of stimulus money out of the New South Wales economy at the worst possible time. Our hospitals, cleaners, nurses, police, paramedics and other public sector workers don't earn huge salaries, on average $89,000 a year. Had they been granted a decent wage rise, they'd have spent it, breathing economic life into the suburbs and those economies most in need, particularly in regional and rural New South Wales. But instead, the New South Wales government has tried to create a false dichotomy. threatening it would cut jobs, the very jobs we need in a pandemic, if wages were increased. That's not an honourable government. Here's a memo for Gladys and Dominic. If you need to lift wages and you need to employ more people in New South Wales, the New South Wales government is the biggest employer in the country. If it can't increase demand in the economy, exactly who will? The levels of procurement and the public sector are powerful. We could and should be using these to rebuild our economy by resuscitating manufacturing and accelerating the transition to renewable energy. But right now, we have a state government completely devoid of ambition, completely devoid of imagination. We deserve better, and only Labor can achieve this purpose. To build a fairer future, we must be in government at a state and federal level. With the next federal election potentially only 12 months away, I'm looking forward to working with each and every one of you as a united Labor movement to elect a Labor government in Canberra that we so desperately need. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce the man who will get us there, our federal leader, Anthony Albanese.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I want to acknowledge the Party President Mark Lennon, General Secretary Bob Namber, Assistant Secretaries George Simon and Dom Offner, Unions New South Wales Secretary Mark Morey, who you've just heard from, and of course my friend and constituent New South Wales Labor leader Jodie McKay. I'd also like to acknowledge my federal colleagues, Meryl Swanson, who's doing such a fantastic job as our host today, and Linda Burney. Thank you once again for your acknowledgement of country and your leadership. And a big shout out to all state and federal MPs who are online with us today. We've all had a lot to absorb this year. And when it comes to delivering surprises, 2020 is the year that just won't quit. I don't think anyone would have dreamed we'd be having the mighty New South Wales Labor Convention online. I certainly don't think anyone had this week's ICAC revelations on their bingo card. But in this time of upheaval, we at least have the Liberal Party to provide just that little bit of predictability. In the federal budget they handed down last week, they reminded us of their complete lack of vision when it comes to the future of our great country. Australia is in the midst of a damaging and painful recession, the Morrison recession. We needed a budget that maintained support for those who needed it most, while setting up our nation for an economic recovery. Instead, Scott Morrison withdrew support for unemployed Australians and offered us an incoherent grab bag of disconnected ideas, largely focused on creating photo opportunities for himself. They rolled out nearly $100 billion in new spending. They racked up $1 trillion of debt. It'll peak at $1.7 trillion by the end of the decade. But we have nothing to show for it. Nothing for aged care, nothing for childcare, nothing for public housing, nothing to boost female participation in the workforce. JobSeeker and JobKeeper cut in favour of hiring subsidies that leave behind Australians aged over 35 years. Just put on the scrap heap. Women left behind, not even thought of. But of course, they can always drive on roads according to this government. Not a single big-ticket infrastructure project to boost productivity and provide jobs. Scott Morrison had an opportunity to build a brighter future. Instead, his budget threw money around like confetti. Even the Nats had to blush. The Liberals always revert to type. They think the economy will somehow fix itself. They think that if everyone just stands back out of the way, the market will fix everything. We in Labor know that that just entrenches privilege and inequality. We know from our own experience that in tough times there is a clear role for government intervention to deliver better outcomes in the public interest. And that's why in my budget response on behalf of Labor, I outlined real plans for real jobs and a better Australia. We propose policies that will change lives while also transforming the economy so it's stronger, more productive and more resilient. Firstly, we'll remove the disincentives for female participation in the workforce by making childcare cheaper and boosting workforce participation. Good for kids, good for women's workforce participation and families, but good for the economy as well. We also outlined the Rewiring the Nation plan, a blueprint to modernise our electricity transmission system so it is fit for the 21st century and can distribute electricity with the greatest efficiency and lower power prices. We can be an renewable energy superpower in the future. We also offered a plan for a future built in Australia where we support local manufacturing and industry using the power of government purchasing. Labor wants to build things in this country, like trains. We think that when government's spending public money on rolling stock or defence acquisitions, we should source them locally wherever possible. And we know, of course, that that is the right way to do because this week in Newcastle, we were looking at trains that were bought in China that now have to be retrofitted. We should do it right and do it once and get Australian jobs here. We want to work with states and industry to ensure the process. We train young Australians in the trades as part of everything we do. We want Australia to have a manufacturing future. All Scott Morrison wants to manufacture is photo opportunities for himself. A Labor government will also invest in public housing maintenance and construction. If we did that right now, we could get thousands of tradies back to work within weeks. I'm a proud houser. I know that a roof over your head gives you security. And we would create an Australian Centre for Disease Control so our nation is better planned for future pandemics. These changes fit with Labor's great heritage of delivering change in the national interest. Scott Morrison can't even deliver anything, not even himself, to a planned National Cabinet meeting yesterday. Labor is the party of change. Universal healthcare, affordable education, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the National Broadband Network, which Scott Morrison and his colleagues trashed and replaced with 19th century copper-based technology that was obsolete before it was even completed. Now, after 7 years of waste, they have admitted that our fibre to the premises model was the right model in the first place. But they'll spend $4.5 billion of your money, public money, cleaning up their stupid mistake. This mob don't understand vision, only division. That's the difference between us and them. They seek government to preserve and entrench the status quo in the interests of themselves and their mates. We seek it to build a better future, to provide our children with better opportunities than we enjoyed. In Parliament last week, I spoke during the condolence motion for the great Susan Ryan. I said that what made her truly great was not just what she did, and she did so much, especially to improve the lives of women and girls, but the fact that what she did has lasted. Susan's life proved that Labor government sees opportunities for change. The power of real change is within the reach of every government, but our opponents would prefer to sit on their hands. The key problem is Scott Morrison and his intolerable complacency. We saw it last year in the bushfires. This year, Scott Morrison has emerged as the ultimate marketing guy with no substance. He makes plenty of promises, but nothing ever happens. For example, 2 years ago, he announced $18 million to provide business grants to help women start businesses. 2 years later, not a dollar is spent, not a single dollar, but he's announced round 2 of this program where nothing happens. But of course, also he promised the world to bushfire victims, but delivered so little. Scott Morrison is always there for the photo op, but never there for the follow-up. He loves his high vis, but when it comes to delivering his promises, he is the invisible man. Last week's budget was so full of shonky, inflated dollar figures, I thought at first I was looking at a Badgerys Creek land deal, or maybe at one of Angus Taylor's computer downloads. What a benchmark of this government's quality Angus is. Just when you thought Tony Abbott had devalued the Rhodes Scholarship as much as possible, along comes Angus. Just one of a front bench that should be known as Dud's Army. It's not easy being the opposition in a time of national crisis. When things are difficult, Australians want their governments to succeed, and they don't want too much politics. This year, we've been constructive. In fact, many of the measures the government has used to deal with the pandemic, like wage subsidies, started out as strong suggestions from Labor and the great Australian trade union movement. It was the same with paid pandemic leave. But as we move forward, Labor now shifts into a higher gear. We are now producing policy and plans that address my 3 great priorities: jobs, jobs and jobs. Labor values of caring for others and government intervention have taken this nation through this dreadful year of 2020. The same values are the best ones to take us out of it. My colleagues and I will continue to work hard to holding this dodgy government to account. That's why this week we'll be reinforcing the need for a National Integrity Commission. But we'll also continue to craft solutions to the problems that have become so apparent during the coronavirus pandemic. Problems like insecure work, the casualisation of the workforce, the lack of respect shown to older Australians, too many of whom are the lonely prisoners of an underfunded aged care sector. We want to draw strength from the great legacies of earlier Labor governments, which not only held Australia together during crises, but made sure that we come out the other end better and stronger than when we went in. Under Paul Keating, universal superannuation arose from the last time that we had a recession. That's the Labor way, not a dream of just snapping back to how things were, always aiming higher. We see a future that's brighter and fairer. We see a future made in Australia, a future where we build prosperity and share the benefits. We see a better future that starts for our youngest Australians and their families in childcare. We see a future of skills and knowledge, growth in renewable energy and tackling the environmental challenges, including climate change, and social housing. We see a future with a transmission grid that belongs to this century, not the last. Action on climate change, an effective NBN, the path to this better future is paved with jobs, high-value jobs, secure jobs. We see a future in which all of these elements come together to strengthen the economy and spread the opportunity that is the foundation of equality. A future in which no one is held back and no one is left behind. A future which I build along with my team, with the rank and file members of our great Australian Labor Party and the trade union movement. And we dare to dream because more than any other political party in Australian history, we can walk the road from dream to reality. Let's do that together.
great was that? Thanks, Albo. As a member of the Federal Caucus, I can tell you that we have a single focus, and that is to get Scott Morrison out of the lodge. We're coming to the end of this session in today's proceedings, but just a reminder that for our next session, we have 6 policy panels, 3 at 11:30 and 3 at 12:30. At 11:30, we have The Caring Economy, hosted by my friend and colleague Emma McBride MP, Shadow Assistant Minister for Mental Health and Carers, focusing on aged care, disability and early learning. To watch this, visit www.newsouthwaleslabour.org.au/caring. The education discussion, hosted by Prue Carr MP, looks at how to deal with the challenges our kids will face in this post-pandemic world. To watch that, visit www.newsouthwaleslabour.org.au/education. And The Future Economy, hosted by Daniel Mookie MLC, which will focus on the future of work. To watch, please visit www.newsouthwaleslabour.org.au/future. Then at 12:30, we have The Nighttime Economy with John Graham MLC at www.newsouthwaleslabour.org.au/night. Making Sydney Work for Everyone is hosted by Chris Minns MP, and it's available at www.newsouthwaleslabour.org.au/cities. And The Regions with David Harris MP at www.newsouthwaleslabour.org.au/regions. If at any time you get lost or want to find your way to another session, just visit allthews.newsouthwaleslabour.org.au/convention. Thank you for your time, and now I'm going to call upon Mel Gatfield from the United Workers Union to give the vote of thanks.
Thanks, Meryl. This has been a great opportunity for members in New South Wales to hear Albo's plans. As the New South Wales Secretary of the United Workers Union, we're so pleased you're leading the charge on early education. It's so important, not only because it's good for women, but also because it's good for children. For too long, cost has been a barrier for children accessing early education, and Labor's commitment to improve funding to the sector will open up new opportunities for children that have long been denied a place, and new opportunities for women to enter the workforce. Funding early education makes economic sense and builds our community. COVID has displayed the cracks in our economy, that women are substantially more vulnerable in their work than men, that so many people are on the edge. This is the moment for change, the time to rebuild a new economy where people can have jobs we can count on, where care work is valued, where we take climate change seriously, women are equal, and where we invest in the industries and the technologies of the future. We can't afford another term of a coalition government. We need real investment in aged and home care. We need a real plan to value early childhood education and care. We need a government that will commit to improving the superannuation scheme. We need urgent action on climate change. We need to criminalise wage theft. We know only Labor governments can create real change, from Medicare to the superannuation system. And the only way we achieve change is by organising and having persuasive conversations. We all need to stand up and get involved. Get involved in your union, get involved in your local campaign, talk to your friends and family about why taking action on these policies is important. We need to make Anthony Albanese the next Prime Minister of our country.
Thank you, Mel. That brings the first session of today's convention to a close. Please stay online for a continued policy discussion. To see the full selection of panel discussions, please visit www.newsouthwaleslabour.org.au/convention. Thank you from everyone here at the magnificent Trades Hall for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of today's discussions.